This is going to be a Rajarman and colleagues in 2022, and this is going to be an article on trauma-informed care. Our goal here, or rather the author's goal, was to educate the field of ABA on the pillars of trauma-informed care that has been present in other practices and other fields of psychology and care, and then walk us through how to incorporate trauma-informed care into our day-to-day practice. And this is really important because this isn't going to be an article about how the PFA and SBT methods are trauma-informed. Rather, this is going to be an article about the principles that kind of define trauma-informed care, and then how we can incorporate that into whatever methods we're using. Because it's important that we don't just be trauma-informed when we're doing SBT. We need to be trauma-informed throughout our entire practice. The key points is how to take those principles and put them into day-to-day life. It also starts a really good conversation, or should I say it continues a conversation, because there has been some past research that has relied on trauma-informed care, but in my opinion, this article really is one of the great ones that really has that conversation with the practitioner. This is how you're going to This is a reasonable way, a realistic way to incorporate trauma-informed care within your practice. And I can tell you off the bat that this is something that I've done in my own practice. You know, I when I read this article, I really did drastically change a lot of the things I did in a way that made a lot of people think that I was maybe moving too fast, or maybe moving too drastically, or throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But to me, it became a matter of almost like, once I've seen it, now I can't unsee it. Once I saw the logic and I saw the trauma-informed approach, while there's still so much to learn, and I'm by no means even close to a moderately, I'm no expert. There are certain things that I saw in my practice that I was doing where I immediately thought, that could be a lot better. That could be changed. And once I saw that change, it felt silly to go back. Like, it didn't make any sense to not be trauma-informed at that point, and at least modify my procedures in that way. So we're going to skip kind of straight to the list. I'm going to skip past the barriers. This is a great article. You should really read the whole thing. Remember, you can download the full article in the email that got you to this article, or to this video. But I'm going to skip past the barriers just for time, and we're going to go straight to some of like the lists that he incorporates. So a possible framework for incorporating trauma-informed care into ABA. So these are the principles. So the first thing that trauma-informed care does is that it acknowledges trauma and its potential impact. This is the basic, this is the trauma-informed part of trauma-informed care. We need to be aware that the individuals we serve, some studies put it at have like a 70 to 90% chance of experiencing trauma by the time they reach our care. That's a really high percentage of trauma, and it's why a lot of practitioners, and I know in some of the newer Hanley webinars he does it too, he acknowledges that instead of trauma-informed, we should really be thinking about trauma-assumed care. And that's the concept of just assuming that all of the people that we serve, all of the population that we work with, probably has some trauma that has been placed on them, so they're always going to react very specifically to certain stimuli. And that's really what trauma is about. It's about reacting to certain stimuli and past traumatic experiences. So let's see. The next one is to ensure safety and trust. This is another principle of trauma-informed care. So safety may be straightforward, they say, from an experimental or behavioral perspective. It suggests that one is free of impending harm. Specifically, I really like the emphasis to put on safety signals and the use of discriminative stimulus in this case. So one of the ways that we can ensure safety and trust is by clearly demonstrating to our client, this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen. Not mystifying it behind special percentages or things like that, but just being open and honest with the things that are going to occur next. And this is what we'd expect from any medical procedure. A lot of times to lessen anxiety, people say, to the dentist, can you walk me through what you're doing? Even though all the dentist is doing is looking around with a mirror, scraping off some gunk on your teeth, it makes people feel safer knowing that the dentist is narrating and walking them through everything that's going on. We'll see this in full play in the enhanced choice model when we start getting into some of the changes that they made. Specifically, they added a lot more role play and explanation to what was going to happen that day versus just popping the child into the contingencies and helping them learn from that. Another pillar is promoting choice and shared governance. This is something that we're really good at in behavior analysis when we want to be. We have oodles of preference assessment research. So promoting choice through the use of concurrent chains assessments, free operant assessments, even like multiple stimulus assessments are really easy ways to always be providing choices and promoting choice and encouraging choice with our clinicians. It says here, promoting choice is one way of helping consumers regain a sense of control over their daily lives. And finally, emphasizing skill building is obviously a pillar of trauma-informed care, and it's another thing that behavior analysis has the opportunity to excel at. And it's more than just, VB map goal 3.2, tacting 400 different things. We're talking about goals that really move that social validity needle and really make an impact in the child's life. So these could be things like making choices, or things like accessing these behavioral areas that they weren't able to access before that have hosts of new reinforcement. So think about pivotal behaviors or behavior cusps. That was the word I was thinking of. And through trauma-informed care, we can really emphasize that. Sorry, that was my cat. I record these in the morning, and even though he is fed, he still wants more food. So let's move to applying a trauma-informed framework to the behavior analytic practice. So first, if we're going to move through and change our own practice, change our own programming, the first thing to note is that client assent would be prioritized. So that assent is when they are opting into treatment rather than just assuming that they're going to participate with us and, pulling them to session room. So this would include perhaps opening the door and letting them know. See? You can see him right there. That's Luca. Say hi, Luca. He's tired. It's like 4 a.m. So client assent would be prioritized by opening the session room and letting the child know that, if you want to just hang out in the playroom or if you want me to take a step outside, that's okay. You can either let me know through whatever communication you want, or I'm going to assume that you're not okay with treatment. I'm going to assume that you're not assenting to treatment unless you give me X amount of social bids that indicate to me that you're ready for me to move forward with what's going on. Second, behavior analysts would actively avoid programming features that might occasion trauma responses. So I like to think of this in a very simplistic example, but this is obviously a very complex thing to do. But imagine if you had a child who experienced physical abuse. Programming a lot of heavy-handed physical prompting, even if it was for skill acquisition and not for behavior reduction, is probably not a good choice. Because of their trauma history, any amount of physical management is likely going to re-trigger some of that trauma. Other things here could be timeout procedures for kids who have experienced seclusion, attention extinction procedures for children who've experienced abandonment. There are a wide variety of procedures that we use that, while neutral to some individuals, may be re-triggering for others. So we need to be aware of that. And it doesn't mean you have to know the history of every single client. That's just impossible with the amount of clients we work with. And sometimes the caregivers don't know the history. Like, I've worked with a lot of adopted parents who simply don't know the abuse history. And that's where I think some of that trauma assumed piece comes in, and really acknowledging that I may not know if you've experienced these things, but I'm going to maybe scrub some of those potentially re-triggering procedures out of my contingencies, and what I'm left with is more of a shaping style, a shaping heavy, reinforcement heavy procedure. Third, behavior analysts would closely monitor any negative emotional responses. So these are things this is where I think behavior analysts really do a poor job of collecting like emotion-based data. So how is the kid feeling? Are they in HRE? What does HRE look like? Are they not in HRE? How do you know they're not in HRE? These are all questions that I ask caregivers to try and figure out what the precursors are, what the signs are that their child isn't in a happy place. And then taking that affect data. So, just looking over every 15 minutes, maybe momentary time sampling it and asking, how are you feeling? Are you feeling okay? And saying, all right, well, 90% of the session, little Johnny was experiencing negative affect. We probably need to be changing some things about session. Sure, there was no problem behavior, but why would you want to go someplace and work with people where 90% of the time you weren't in a happy mood? So I know this was a long video, but in my opinion, it's one of the most important videos that we can talk about, and one of the important it was one of the reasons why I wanted to have a training like this, so I could take the time to talk about articles like this, because it really did change the way I program. There's a lot of procedures that I kind of assumed were neutral, when upon closer examination probably were causing some traumatizing incidences in the children I served. Specifically, I used to use a lot of extinction-based procedures, and through education and reevaluating and articles like these, I was able to fade that from my practice, and I've really, I think my clients have really benefited from it. So I think what I'm trying to say is that if you read any articles of the whole 12 days of PFA, make it be this one, and really spend some time self-analyzing your own procedures. I'm not saying that you have to totally drop extinction, nor do I think you should, but you should definitely be thinking about what's the one step I can take today to make my procedures and my practice more trauma-informed. And what else can I learn? Because there's a lot more content on trauma-informed care and trauma-assumed care that's out there, and we definitely should be consuming more of it. All right, everyone, that is our longest video, hopefully of the entire process, but I hope you enjoyed it.